So now we're gonna transition into some audience questions, some viewer questions.
Okay.
So I'll tell you, man, the people really asked some in-depth questions. Was it like pretty clean there in Norway? Like how was that?
Oh yeah, the environmental question. Yes, it was very clean. Like, I lived inside the biggest city in Trums, basically, but it's only like 85,000 people. But they had like a downtown, and it felt bigger than it was just because you see everybody out walking on the streets. And so even with the people walking around and the parties and stuff, they had, oh, this is something that might be interesting to people. They had 5 different types of trash cans. So every place I went, they would just have these 5 little trash cans, different colored bags. Green was for compost, orange was for cardboard, red was for paper, blue was for plastic recycling, and then white was for all your other trash, basically. So,
wow, that's pretty cool.
yeah, it's like very part of the mindset and whatever, to be in nature and also to like be environmentally kind of sustainable.
Surprised they should be producing a lot of basketball players because I would have been like cardboard, trash. I would have, that's pretty cool though. That's pretty.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Mark Zuckerberg having the power to buy up sacred lands in Hawaii? And is there any ways to even stop that?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts about that are that it is not new. That kind of, there's always been treaties and official ways of governing that people on the ground are not happy with. Like, you see of indigenous Hawaiians who are not happy with the real estate market in Hawaii, but that the Hawaiian government is kind of okay with it, right? Because you get tax money off of those sales. And I think like really what needs to be done about that, not just in Hawaii, but in Alaska or anywhere else, is having free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples and people whose lands those are when they're making those sales. And we don't really, in the United States, have that institutionalized or have a way of doing that. But it is it's international law that that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and I personally, how I feel on it, I'm Polynesian, of course. Those type of things, they upset me, but it's like it's like, man, when you have money, it's like, you know what I'm saying? Because I personally still believe, and a lot of Polynesians believe Hawaii is still a sovereign country. It was overthrown illegally.
Mm-hmm.
I still stand on that. I know, they still fight on that. Even when like the government wants to make certain moves. I don't know if you heard about that. The Mount Mauna Kea movement, but they were trying to put a big telescope on that on that so sacred grounds, and they had a big fight on that. I mean, there was they had national coverage. There's multiple like celebrities, people from all over the country were traveling there to stand on that. And I think those type of movements, like, hey, I believe in it. I personally support, because you can't just, come on now. You can't. If
I know. And then what do? They have lawsuits, right? But the law, the system of law that we're operating under was created primarily by white people. And so it also requires lots of money to go through the legal process and time that a lot of people may not have to do something that they already feel like is a lost fight, because you see it happening all over the place. So yeah,
and even with some policies that are set up to protect indigenous people, that I see, like, they still find ways to, to kind of bypass those. I'm like, bro.
Exactly.
So yeah, definitely, free Hawaii question. And someone's asking, like, what is global warming? Can you define it? Because I guess where they're from, I'll tell you this. Depending on what part of America you're at, like, you live in a different America. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think they think they experience that. But this viewer wants to know, like, what is global warming?
And there's a lot of disinformation about global warming and climate change as well. and this is what I studied in school. So yeah, always ask me questions about these things. It is that since industrialization began, we've been utilizing fossil fuels for energy, and at an increasing rate as well. And when you burn fossil fuels, which come up from out of the ground, then you are burning carbon, because those are all decomposed bodies of like plants and animals from the past. And it's natural to have carbon in the atmosphere. Like we have volcanoes, for example, that can release greenhouse gases. They also release ash that typically like causes the earth to cool down. And like I said, oil comes naturally from out of the ground too, but we're using it at such a fast rate, and at such an increasing rate, that we're actually seeing that those particles, carbon emissions like carbon dioxide or methane, when they're in the atmosphere, the energy that comes from the sun gets trapped inside Earth. Like basically, they will pass through the atmosphere. Then if it hits ice or something, that energy will just go right back into space. But if it hits like the ground, then it heats things up, you know? And so carbon emissions stop that heat from escaping back to space. And so you just see over time that the more carbon we have in the atmosphere, the more we're trapping heat inside our own atmosphere. And so those stay in the atmosphere for a long time, well, in different amounts of time, but for a long time as well. So even if we just stop burning fossil fuels right now, we'll still have all the carbon built up from historical, fossil fuel emissions. So that's basically what the greenhouse gas effect is. And we've already grown the global temperature by 1.3 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? But during the last ice age, it was only 6 degrees Celsius colder than now. So we could really grow like 3 or 4 degrees of warming, and humans have just never ever lived in that condition. So
okay. Yeah, I'm glad you answered that, because I personally couldn't have, broke it down like that. But yeah, so there goes. The next viewer says, most people agree that there's some degree of human-influenced climate change, but no one really agrees on the significance. With the sheer cost of going green in automobile industry, housing industry, and city electrical grid systems being very cost prohibitive, how much of the national spending should be invested at this very moment in the infrastructure cost? Keep in mind that we already are in trillions of dollars in debt and have a budget proposal that already exceeds the total dollars of the federal government that brings in each year. So he's saying, where does the money come from, and what are we gonna cut to get to where you think we should be?
Yeah, I would add that, like, scientists agree that climate change is happening, and that what might happen in the future, though we're always learning more. And unfortunately, it's politicized so much that people like kind of choose fact or fiction. And so, like, in reality, Alaska, for example, is seeing melting permafrost, and 80%, I think, of Alaska's infrastructure is built on melting permafrost. So when basically permafrost is like ground that's frozen year round. So when it thaws, then all the stuff built on top of it collapses or falls into the sea or needs repairs. And so it's going to cost a lot of money, and it already has lots of impacts, climate change does, both fiscally and just like for people's quality of life. So basically, when we're talking about money, we have to have a forward thinking view also about how much money it will cost to repair all of our infrastructure, or to respond to, like, in Louisiana, they have like a melting, or they have a subsidence. Basically, the sea level is rising, and what does it cost to replace an entire city, Right. So, but personally, what I think, like, what is the world's biggest or single largest emitter of carbon emissions? a lot of people don't know this, but it's the U.S. Department of Defense. Like our military is the single biggest emitter of carbon emissions in the world.
And then is that through just creation of like their weapons and stuff like that, or
creation of weapons, like travel, and creation of heavy artillery and the movement of it, I would say, are the main things. And it's a big organization, and it's not the most efficient organization, which is another reason why we might have heavy carbon emissions. And so we actually spend 3% of our GDP on that in the United States, or about 50% of the discretionary spending caused by Congress. 50% is our military.
that's okay.
Yes. So if we're thinking about like cutting things, I would say we are living in an over militarized world. Even in Anchorage, like on a local level, our police are heavily armed. And in Alaska, in Anchorage, for example, 20% of our municipal budget goes to police. Like a fifth of our entire budget goes to police. So I think like across the board, if we want to choose things that we could move money into, I would say it's in moving it out of militaries and out of police, because, you know, we like to say that these things keep us safe, but what if that money was actually used for like community-based social services where people could actually get help for things? Because as we know, 60% of people who go to jail go back. And it's because we don't really have these solutions to crime. Like we need to start at the beginning, which is providing for people.
Okay, interesting. No, it's pretty much this topic. I mean, it's pretty in depth, you know. And I mean, just talking to you, I've already learned, new things on this topic, because I know with global warming and like the Green New Deal, like I personally, like I'm not against it or anything, but like in the state of New Mexico, like our governor is a Democrat. I forget how to say her name, like Grisham, something like that. But 80 to 90% of our state's resources comes from oil and gas. And so I know when you're talking about jobs and X, Y, and Z, people's livelihoods, like you kind of, you know what I mean? I'm not against the Green New Deal, things like that. It's kind of like, dang, how do we, how do you, take?
It's like our entire economy is built on it. So how do we?
The entire economy. I mean, it's thousands of jobs for the state, and so I just kind of thought, it was just interesting that our governor, of course, she's always going to support her party, but then when Biden got into office, she kind of was like backtracking, and so I kind of just, it's a topic that I need to learn more about, but I just know, like, I don't know,
it like crosses across all of our society. That's why it's called systemic, and it's super difficult to reimagine what our world could look like. Like we've inherited a certain world. How do we create a new one? But one thing I'll say is that the United States hasn't had any mass reform since the 1960s. So we're in a completely new world now. We're 60 years later from that, and our government is the same that it was 60 years ago. I think that's how we might think about it, is that our world is changing. It's more fast paced, and also the environment is changing. How do we take in this new information and really like change the policies that we see in front of us, and our mindsets too?
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I've learned in my master's program. Effective leaders, they have to understand, with change, your policies have to change, with the world and technology, and all these things that are changing. You have to be an effective leader, you have to keep going. And so I just feel like we're kind of stuck, as a society, in that, like, we have an issue, we have an issue, but it's like it affects everything. And so, like, how can we come together? And we still haven't figured it. I don't know. We, like, you know what I'm saying?
No, we haven't.
More like just like, okay, well, dang, I see a lot of things from economic, perspective and, people's livelihoods and creating jobs. And so I just find it like, it's just a very in-depth and, you know, it's a crazy topic.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of my view on it. The next viewer had a question. So he read your book and he's saying, I'd like for you to expound on why you believe, and then he puts in quotes, I believe, from what you wrote in your book, I believe it is time for us to realize that racism, environmental harm, and our systems of governance can be inevitably be linked by one thing, white supremacy. So pretty much, like, can you like expound on it and explain, context?
Yeah. Well, like we were just saying, I mean, these things are all so interrelated, from environmental harm to mass incarceration. And I think also maybe I'll just like define based on the dictionary what white supremacy is, because we're all coming from different places with different backgrounds and contexts. So white supremacy is the belief that white people are a superior race and should dominate society. That's the dictionary definition. Mm-hmm. To me, like if you look around our society, you see that it's not just a belief, it's also kind of a reality. That in America, non-Latinx white people make up 60% of the population, but they're 92.6% of all Fortune 500 CEOs. They're 80% of all nonprofit directors, 88% of all senior foreign service members in government. So whether you're in a nonprofit or in business or in government, all of the leadership of these sectors is primarily white people. And they're overrepresented according to their race than, in the nation. And at the same time, we see that Black and Latinx and Indigenous people, Polynesians and Asian people are overrepresented in police shootings and imprisonment. I won't say Asian people, I'll say Polynesians definitely in Alaska are overrepresented in police shootings and imprisonment. And we're also the ones that are living with the worst like environmental outcomes. There's a lot of pollution in inner cities, for example, that affects Black people, or in North Carolina, where I was living, in rural regions, like rural Black communities, they have hog farms with just like literal open cesspools of like hog waste, because and also in Alaska, we have over 3,000 people who just don't have running water, and that's primarily in Indigenous communities. There's just this large wealth gap for people of color versus white people in the United States, and that's because there's never been any kind of economic redress for the stolen land and labor that has been taken over time. And really, we haven't acknowledged that that's happened either, because they don't really teach about it in schools. So I believe that all of these things are not because like people of color are worse than or less smart than or less capable than white people to like achieve these leadership positions, but because we're just not adequately represented in leadership. And because of that, we don't inherit the opportunities or the financial support to get education, to be in business or in policy and improve our own situations. So that's how I would say they're all connected, is really just by the reality that the vast majority of our leadership is white people.
Okay, so would you say that like, because America, I mean, we're a diverse country. Would you say like because our system was created by white people, do you think are you saying kind of like it's they have an advantage? You know what I'm saying? They have pretty much like a head start. So would you say like that's the reason why we're either overrepresented or underrepresented in kind of like the wrong areas?
Yeah, there's been an overrepresentation and a head start, like you said, and over time, just no one has admitted to it or tried to really change it. Like we just haven't. Like, I mean, if you look at any other persecuted people across the world, you've seen that there's been a lot of instances in which people have gotten some sort of redress, like some sort of institution to be able to govern themselves, or some financial payout to kind of like level the playing field. And that just hasn't happened here. And then also, like, over contemporary history, there's always been ways in which we've talked about, hey, we'd like some sort of equality, some sort of redress, and bad things happen to people. You know, like after the end of the Civil War, for example, there was the Reconstruction period where they wanted to build up and allocate land for Black people in America. And at that time, there was mass lynchings like across the country to scare people into not doing that. People who do the lynchings don't get in trouble because they have power already and have money for legal, action. And so the power has kind of built up, and makes it really difficult for us to, I suppose, like govern ourselves.
Right. No, I say that just because I can I personally, so my master's, I mean, I don't know if the viewers know that I'm getting my master's in public administration, which mostly deals with local government, or it can be on the administrative side of things or on the political side of things. And so that was one of the main factors why I personally chose that sector. One, to impact lives. Two, to impact lives for people that look like me. You know what I'm saying? So, because I personally felt like I was always the one. I mean, I don't know about you, but like when I was in class, or growing up through high school, or even through sports, I was always like, "Hey, who's in charge?" I was kind of questioning, and then it would be typically a white person, or for the majority of the case, that's what it would be. And so I was kind of like, man, like ain't nothing wrong with that. I mean, for me, I was like, just like, why, how can I, why isn't there more of us, leading? Why isn't there more of us in like power positions, and this and that? So that was one of my main pushes. And then I actually saw he's the city manager of Las Cruces. He's actually the first city manager as well, like some of the Samoan descent, to be in that position. His name's Ifo Pili. So I've had a lot of great conversations with him, and he was another reason why I decided to go into that sector, because I saw him. I was like, yo, this guy's like me. We grew up the same. We're Samoan, and so I got to see and look up to him, and like, okay, this is a sign. This is a sign that I should be doing this, And then I don't know what side of things I will be, working on for sure, whether it be politically or administrative side of things. But I know that I'll be able to, have a positive impact, and have, the younger generation look and be like, yo, like, he's Samoan, he's, brown, he's,
yeah,
be like, and he's in the power to, have a say in policy. And so I think, those things are powerful, and those things, as time goes on, like that's one of the things that I hope people get from this, and we see this across the nation, that see this type of change.
There's definitely like a mental health aspect to it too, kind of. I feel like what you're touching on, like if you don't have any of the context and the history as to why we live in certain situations, and don't have access to leadership positions, we start to think that it's because of us, like we're not good enough, or it really takes like seeing other people who are doing it to feel like you can do it too. And so I think that's why I think, for one reason, that's why I think that it's so important to have more representation in our policy making. And why?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I feel, 100% stand behind that, because, I mean, I feel like that right there, it plays a big role. Just seeing someone, come before you, or of your same, race, or it could be your neighbor. It doesn't have to be the same race. When you see them do something, it's kind of, it's a powerful, thing to see and witness. But I do, a lot of it is, I would say, plays a role with mental health. So I'm glad you touched up on that point, because that's a huge that's another reason for this podcast too, to help people and give people the platform to say, hey, how do you help handle mental health situations? Because I feel like our generation, I mean, shoot, we have a lot of people shy away from that topic, but I think it's powerful to bring those type of things up because so people can relate and be like, oh shoot, like I'm not
Yeah,
crazy.
this is bigger than me. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So going back to this topic of you know the system and this and that. So you wouldn't necessarily say like you have, because I feel like white people would watch this and be like, I'm not racist, I'm not this and that. So
Yeah.
are you more touching up on the system and not like the actual, like, it's race of white people? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean it's a structural thing, and I think it is important for people to recognize that like we all have different ethnic backgrounds, whether you're racialized as white or other different backgrounds, and like so I think it is important to recognize the misconceptions that we're grown up with, right? And be able to start changing those, because sometimes things people say can be really offensive or hurtful, or even when people aren't intending it. But yeah, mainly what I'm talking about is that we just have this system of white supremacy, basically, and it's not just like very extremely racist people when we're talking about white supremacy. I'm just talking about that, like, unfortunately, this is the system that we are living in, and it does take extra action, and specifically like representation of non-white peoples, to be like equal representation, basically, because we're not at an equal representation level. Like I said, there's like an over representation of white people in leadership and an over representation of Black and indigenous peoples in like being policed, for example. And so it's just like recognizing those systems and like statistics and being like, okay, so if I see it happening in front of me in real life, I should probably say something, because we don't want it to continue being this way. Like my idea is, um, they say that white supremacy is a belief, and you would think that seeing these numbers in front of you, then you would be like, oh, I don't want it to be that way, right? Uh,
Okay, no, that makes sense. Just because I want to follow up with that because I didn't want people to get it twisted, like that you're not saying you know white people are like necessarily bad people. You're just pretty much just saying the system is broken, and
yeah.
pretty much like to be in America where there's so many different cultures and this and that, like we are underrepresented, and like the system was built off from white people, and so it's kind of like it says for all, but it's catered to and some people don't know that. Even white people, they don't notice it. They, what I'm saying. So it's a different. I always believe in that everyone kind of lives in their own America. Like we're all in one country, but like what you're going through in Alaska is something different than in Mexico, Florida, this and that. Like personally, my America is a little different. A little bit about my kind of like perspective. I'm personally conservative, but like I feel like I'm a new wave of conservative. Like what I'm saying. Because I'm surrounded by I work for Republican Party of Doñana County, which is in the city, but I'm surrounded by straight white people, and and it's nothing's wrong with that, But I am aware and conscious of like I'm the only colored person in this right now. I wouldn't say I'm the only conservative of color in this county, in the state, in the city, but I'm one of the only ones that and I am aware of that. But one of the main reasons why I personally kind of align with the conservative views because I kind of growing up, my family we grew up off of food stamps, public, government assistance, all those things, and nothing's wrong with that. Nothing's wrong with that. But I personally felt like it kind of handicapped us into like depending on it. I'm like I said, I'm not trying to downplay it or downgrade it, but I just felt like kind of like what you said earlier, like even though we're part of like a lot of the wrong side of the numbers, like people of color, it's not because we're dumb or this or that. It's because I would say like misguided, So I personally felt like just growing up and living off of that, I felt like it kind of put us in a box, and so I felt like that's kind of like my America, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, no, understood.
how I became, and there's like I said, I'm surrounded by white people, and sometimes like they'll say something but they won't, like, you know what I mean, they think it's okay, or that, like, say for example, like my last name's Famasino, Louis Famasino, and then like I'll tell them, and then some people are like, oh wow, like you guys always have these names. Oh, okay, depending on what they say. And I've had someone else say like, oh, blah blah blah. I was just like, kind of like, hey, that's not really that's not really okay to say, um because like that's my last name. I take pride in my name. I take pride, my ancestors, you know what I'm saying, we carry
Yes.
we take pride in our name, and it's nothing, it's not, I'm not taking it personal, but I just gotta let you know that's not like, it's kind of not formal, because I'm cool, with speaking up and saying this, but someone else, of Samoan descent, Polynesian descent, might be like really offended. So I'm kind of, I'm taking this time and this chance, that I'm surrounded by, white people in my area, to kind of, educate and kind of, be the, how do I say this, like, the person to be like, hey, this is, you know what I'm saying? So
I talked a little bit about that in the book, because like when I was living in Norway, I was the only person of color in my entire building that I was or maybe I should say the only Black person in my entire building that I was working with. Right. So it, like, yeah, I would talk about in my first chapter, just like all the crazy stuff this one person had said to me, which is basically
was
like,
in the first chapter.
Yeah, in the first chapter.
What was his name, like Benjorn? I didn't know how to say
Yeah,
his name.
Bjorn Christian.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
He was kind of crazy. I don't know that.
He was crazy.
Bold, he was kind of bold.
It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. And so, like, when we're talking about representation, like, it's also difficult. It's easier said than done to just be like, oh, we should have more people of color, because it's hard to be in a situation like that where you're the only one who understands you. But on the other hand, like, one thing I learned a lot more about government services from different countries' perspectives by traveling. And like in Norway, they have free healthcare, free education. Like, really, college costs $30 per semester. Yeah, and so it's like, we do social services in the United States in not a very good way, I would say. Like, they make it not only intentionally difficult to do it, but then like you have to meet all of these different requirements, and at that point, like, you can't really do better for yourself, I would say, because they make it so difficult to move in society. And like, in general in America, we have so much inequality at the moment that it is very difficult to move tax brackets from what your parents' generation came from.
Exactly. And yeah, I feel like we're fighting a different fight. Like, I take it, certain things, with certain things that I decide to, attack and tackle, like, I take it personal. I feel like, my parents, grandparents, they're from Samoa. And so I take it they had their difficulties and their challenges was, different. They got us to America, they got us to, and so I feel like, I put it upon myself to like, okay, what's the next, you know what I mean? What's the next issue you have to tackle and stuff, things like that, like with the social services or just like the inequalities. I take it upon myself to be like, okay, hey, when I leave this earth, like, I want to make sure, like, we establish this and this, so the people that come after me, you know what I mean, can have it easier, but like, it's set up to where it's more fair, it's more, they can be proud to live in America,
Yes.
Yeah, and so like I said, when I'm in these rooms, surrounded by people that don't look like me, I'm not I would say I'm comfortable. I really just I'm just more on top of my game for one, and then for two, I feel it as it's an opportunity for me to display like the Polynesian people that they don't know. You know what I'm saying? So it's my
You need all different sorts of folks doing all different things to
pretty
achieve,
much yes, exactly. And so
yeah, a better
they're pretty much
future.
like at the end of the day, we're all American, too. So it's like, hey, this is what my visions and what my America looks like, and I have to kind of display that and let people know, and I have to represent being Samoan like in there. I'm gonna hold it down. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, man, and with this podcast, like this is the platform for. I feel like a lot of people are they shy away from certain conversations. Which is understandable, but I feel like it's important to have these type of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Whether whatever your point of view is, I feel like we should all be able to come together. And I relate that to growing up in Alaska, seeing all different types of races, cultures. Why I feel comfortable just going up to anybody and be like, hey, you want to have a conversation about this or this, because the way we grew up, and the way we were able to work with everybody. I was reading in the book that uh you missed Alaska, and like you had friends, you went over to their house and you had Korean barbecue, or like you were at school and you had the Samoans playing the you like
Yeah.
like that's kind of like that's what we grew up in, and that's what we saw, and so that's why like I take that everywhere I go, like whether I'm in New Mexico, Idaho, Arizona, I take that like we're all
Be around all sorts of people.
exactly. And so
Yes.
no matter like what your point of view is, or people's, if they're far right, far left, whatever. I always just feel like at the end of the day, we should still be able to sit at a table, Zoom each other, and have these conversations that might be uncomfortable, but as long as you're moving forward, and um and kind of yeah, you can come to how do you say this, like you just be comfortable talking to each other, and like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be an argument, or so I feel good about having these types of conversations, because I mean they need to happen. And
Yeah, we can learn more from, like I said, being around people who are different from you, or like come from a different culture from you. That's the easiest way to learn, not just about them but about yourself too, and like what are my actual um like assumptions I have that I don't think about most of the time just because I was raised with them. Like I think we all need to do that a little bit more.
right, reflect and move forward. So this viewer he asked that last question, and so this is the second question that he had. So he says, on the topic of systematic racism, how do you personally define systematic racism? How does critical race theory affect what you would define as systematic racism? It's like, can you provide a single example of singular or systematic racism that is too blatant and apparent that anyone, regardless of their race or political affiliation, could look and honestly say, yes, I agree that there's a problem. There is a systematic racism problem as you defined it. So I know you kind of touched up on
Yeah.
something. So we'll kind of just elaborate on whatever.
Yeah, I like that they bring up critical race theory because I think a lot of people haven't heard about it. And it's basically just the idea that we don't actually have a race, that race is something that has kind of been made up and that we all are socialized to understand. And we talk about like black, white, Asian, often they don't even say Pacific Islander half the time. And then they'll say like indigenous. And it's just not correct because everybody basically you can't categorize people in that way because we have so much of a diversity of cultures and ethnicities within each of those groups and across them. And so like basically they say you're racialized as white or racialized as blank because those lines don't actually exist. Like what makes up race are the policies that have been like based on race, like up until the 80s Black people were only allowed to live in these neighborhoods because they could only get loans for those neighborhoods, for example. And so how is it related to systemic racism? I think it's difficult to say exactly one thing that kind of shows that systemic racism exists. I've also noticed from, my travels, some people just don't want to agree with you. So they'll come up with all sorts of reasons. But one fact I think that might be interesting, just to show like how far back this systemic racism goes and like how deeply rooted it is that, life insurance, for example, is something that a lot of people get with their jobs, that a lot of people feel like they need in order to pay for funeral services or like pass on money to next generations if they pass away. Life insurance was actually created during slavery. New York Life Insurance was the first life insurance company. And what it was that it was insurance for if your slaves died, then you could get a payment.
Say what?
Yes, that's when it was created. And now it's so much part of our society, no one would even think that that's where it came from. But that's true of like major shipping companies too, originally started with the transport of slaves across the Atlantic Ocean. So those are just some examples of how we've created these institutions in order to have slavery, for example, and they've continued until today. And we still have inequality today that's related to those initial institutions.
Okay. I personally, it's probably like a month or two ago. Like I've always heard the term critical race theory. And then I've kind of researched it here and there, but I was still a little just confused, what was, it's just so like in depth, and it's kind of like, not that I don't understand it, but I'm just like, you know what I'm saying? I'm kind of just like more just confused on it. And like,
yeah,
how, did you see that they're putting it in like school curriculums? Do you think that's like it's a good thing?
Well, I heard that in Georgia, they're saying that you're not allowed to have any school on race, like any discussion of race within school. Me personally, I feel like we have to be explicit about race because who does it benefit to not be explicit about it? Because we see like currently what the power dynamics are. And if we just like if we don't talk about the institutionalization of race and like how our government kind of boxes that we check have influenced the types of policies that shape our lives, then I don't think that we can really get to the core root of the problem, personally.
Okay. So you think it should be in schools, or like, it should be taught. So what like
well, I think it's also difficult to teach it in schools too, because I mean there's a lot of interrelated issues, like who are you getting the training to teach it? Like, do you know how to teach it in a respectful way? Because I got called on a lot in class of like, Michaela, give the Black persons, so like, I don't know if I do think it should be taught. I don't know like exactly how that would happen or.
See that, like I said, like I understood like, like the meaning and this and that of it, but I was just like, okay, so like how, like, like how are they gonna, put this in the curriculum? Like how can you even, just because like you said, it's just, it's an in-depth thing where you just don't know, you know what I'm saying? We don't really, we're trying to, you say this, like implement it, but don't even know how. So that's more where I was confused in, like, so what's even really going on? How like, so that's why I asked that. So I just want to kind of say my last question really is for you. Is like, what is the legacy or like the wave you wanna leave on this earth? When it's all said and done, what do you want to be known for? What legacy do you want to leave?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big question. I think that I want to have as much like collective happiness, I suppose, with other people as I possibly can. And I think that there's like a lot of structures out there that make it very difficult for people to have like success and happiness. And that's why I'm so explicit about talking about race and policy and, and it scares me that like by 2050, we're expected that most of our fish stocks will be collapsing in the world.
Say what?
Yes.
Okay.
Read that in my book.
I love tuna, so hold up.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's one of them. Cod is definitely very threatened, or will be in the next 50 years.
Okay.
And we're in 30 years from that. They also say that by 2045 there will be ice-free Arctic summers. So, I mean, there are things like that that are going to happen in our lifetimes, and I'm not exactly sure how we're going to handle them. And so, I'd like to be as much of use in solving those challenges as possible.
Okay. Salute to that. And then where could so you have your book out, right? So where is it available? How can they get their hands on it? Like, can you download it? And then social media wise, like where can they also follow you, support you? Yeah, so if you want to kind of give that information out.
My book is available on Amazon.com, and the ebook is only 99 cents at the moment, but that'll be going up in 5 days. And I also have my paperback on Amazon. You can also call different bookstores and ask them to order it, because I do have it on a wholesale retailer. And my social media for my book is at Welp, WELP _by _ Mickey D. And my my Instagram is at Mickey D, and that's MICKYDEEE.
Okay, cool. And then we'll write those the links for the book and her social media handles in the description below. But I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure, and I actually learned. I mean, that's why I like speaking to people. I like learning from other people. I like learning other people's worldviews or just about their life, because I never walk around thinking like, oh, I'm better or this and that. So it's cool to learn from other people. And shoot, you might see me in Norway going back to school. I appreciate you, for tapping into the Wave Room, and for the viewers and audience out there. Thank you so much, and yeah, we'll see you later.
Thank you for having me on. Good luck with your next episodes.
Thank you.